Hey everyone, this is Damon, and I'm doing a very different type of video today. This is not something that I had really expected to be doing, obviously, but I felt compelled to share my thoughts and my feelings on the passing of legendary actor Dean Stockwell. Um, this is something that really hits really hard for me uh, personally. Yeah, in case you don't know who Dean Stockwell is, younger people may not really be aware of who exactly he was. He is a renowned. He was a renowned actor. He was basically a child actor, the golden age of Hollywood. Going, I think, all the way back to at least the 40s, I believe. I did a little bit of research into it. I mean, he's been around forever. He did a lot of movies, television, uh, well into, I would say, at least like 7, 8 decades. And he was 85, so it had to be about 7 decades or so since he was a child actor. And so I can't speak for a lot of his other work outside of the television series Quantum Leap, and I think this is I feel like I've mentioned it at least once or twice in any videos I've done in the past. Um, I mean, he's done so much more work beyond that, but I feel like the best way for me to talk about this is to share my thoughts on the series and what it meant to me because he was a big part of that show. So, so for anybody who's not really aware, um, just a brief little history of Quantum Leap. Quantum Leap was a series that ran on NBC from 1989 to 1993. It was basically when I was in high school. It was a very hard time in my life, adolescence and dealing with a lot of change. There were a lot of other personal things going on in my life at that time. And I discovered the show not right away, but like pretty early on in its lifespan. And I fell in love with the show. I mean, I'm a huge time travel fan, and the premise of the show was a quantum physicist by the name of Sam Beckett, played by Scott Bakula, another wonderful actor. He basically creates this time travel experiment, and something goes wrong. It takes place in like the mid '90s or so, and something goes wrong, and he ends up getting stuck in the past, and he leaps back and forth within his own lifetime. And the premise is that he basically switches places in time with just random people. Could be anywhere in the world. It could be man, woman, white, black, any walk of life. It didn't matter who it was. He would take the place of that person in the past, and and the only way he could move on was to change something that happened in their life and change history for the better and to put right what once went wrong. So it was a different situation every week and that was part of the fun of the show. But it was such a great show. Just forget about the science fiction aspect of it. It was really more of a drama show. It had a lot of comedic elements, just dealt with a lot of serious issues too, because he was just an average person. Just he could leap into me, could be you, could be your brother, your sister, anybody, and change their life for the better. Something that went wrong. And where Dean Stockwell comes into this is that he was the holographic observer for him. He had to have something that connected him to his own time because he was stuck in the past. So Dean Stockwell played the role of his friend, who was Al, and he was an admiral who was in charge of the project that oversaw this whole thing. And he would come and he would appear as a hologram that only Sam could see and hear. So no one else could see him. I mean, there were some exceptions, like young children could see him, animals could see him. But he had information from the computer at the future project, and he was always like really wildly dressed, and he had like on different outfits all the time, and he was sort of the comic relief to the show, but at the same time he was also the voice of like reality. I guess I don't know the right word to use for that. It's just you basically they were two sides of the same coin. Um, Sam was like the do-gooder. He was, I think even an episode he called him terminally good. He was raised. He was a farm boy raised in Indiana, but he was like super smart, and he had a really good life. He had like a great upbringing with parents that loved him. He had a brother, a sister, and he always saw the good in everyone, and he always had hope for humanity, and he just saw he had a really strong sense of justice and what was wrong with the world, and just wanted to just go with his instinct, and he knew what was right deep down in his heart. And then you had the other side of that, which was Al, who had a much tougher life. He was older. He was a POW, MIA in Vietnam. He lost his first wife because she believed he was dead. Um, and that was something that we didn't find out like in the beginning, because there was a running gag that he had like 5 ex-wives. He was this huge womanizer, and he always it was part of the fun of the episode. It was just the banter between the two of them, because they were really the only ones that talked to each other. I mean, Sam was always there interacting with everyone else, but Dean Stockwell would always be um, basically talking with uh, Scott Bakula, and they would be interacting with each other because because Sam was the only one that could actually hear and see Al, with some exceptions, as I said. But for the most part, that's the way the series was, and it was a pretty basic formula. Like every week, that's what we could count on. They were the only two constants on the show. Every week, it was always some different situation, and what he brought to the show was it just couldn't work without both of them. He brought a lot of his real life into that role. He was a well-known activist, for just Mother Earth and all, like recycling, and he was really like, he brought a lot of that into the role, his views on things, and Al, his character Al was more of the realist in terms of like he experienced a lot of hardships in life that a lot of us take for granted, and he would always kind of provide that foil, whereas Sam might not. He automatically sees the good in every situation, and Al would be sometimes the one that would tell him, "You didn't realize how hard things were." Like we talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he's saying you were too young to really understand what it is we all went through. Like he was in the Navy, he was an ex-Navy pilot, and as I said, he was an MIA in Vietnam for 6 years, and he went through a lot of suffering. He had a very broken family home life. And he had a disabled sister with Down syndrome, and he experienced so many things that Sam didn't. Sam kind of had a sheltered life, and Al experienced the world. So he really needed that guidance from him, and that voice of kind of bring him down and say, "This is the way things are. I know that you want to change things, and you like a perfect example is early on in the series. Sam leaps into a black man in the South in 1955, a chauffeur driving around an elderly white woman like a Driving Miss Daisy type situation. This is the actual episode that made the networks notice the series and say, okay, we're bringing this show back. And it's the perfect example where Sam is like, I'm in the middle of the civil rights movement. I could try to initiate some real change here. And Al's trying to tell him, no, you can't. He's saying, you're not here to change the world. you can't change the world on such a huge scale as much as you may want to. You just can't. Like, you have to focus on one life at a time, and have that mean something, because there are some things that are too big for us. um, I mean, and it's great to want to change some of those things, but you also have to bring it down to reality and realize that sometimes just changing one life will make a difference, and then that will rub off on someone else, and make a difference there. Um, so I know I'm not really talking about Dean Stockwell as an actor per se, but my experience with him is through this show, and I know he's done other things. I know he did like Battlestar Galactica, I think, like after he was on Quantum Leap. But he's appeared so many times, and it's just what he brought to Quantum Leap inspired me as a person to be a better person. Just seeing the two of them together, because you can't have Sam without Al, and you can't have the two characters separately. It just wouldn't have worked. Part of what made that show so great was the chemistry between these two wonderful actors. Um, and if you really want to get a good example of exactly how great of an actor Dean Stockwell truly was, and if you're not familiar with Quantum Leap, check out the season finale of season 2, which is called MIA, and see exactly how powerful a performance that man could give. Uh, just make you want to cry at how you feel for him as a character and as a person. Just when he talks about how he lost the love of his life, and why none of his marriages ever worked beyond that, because he can never get past that first love that he had, that he lost because of a really hard deal that life gave him. And he wanted so desperately to change it, and realizing that he just couldn't. And hearing how hurt he was, like, just you watch that performance, that is what made me fall in love with his character. Um, and it solidified my love for the show. It was one of the first episodes I had ever seen of the show, because I caught it after the show had been on for a while. It was like a year and a half or so it had been on. I caught it that summer, right before the third season premiered. And so I caught that episode. It was like one of the first episodes I saw during like the first couple of weeks I was watching it. So that really solidified my love for the show, and said, man, this is some powerful stuff. And that's just one perfect example of what a wonderful actor he was, and made me realize he has been around forever. And I'm sadly, I just have never really had a chance to see a lot of work outside of that show. But it still really hits me here, because Quantum Leap as a series just changed. I mean, it changed so many lives, but it changed my life so much. I honestly feel like I just would not be the man I am today if that show hadn't been around. This show brought me and my wife together when we started dating 10 years ago. Our mutual love for the show. It was just, I used to write some fan fiction for the show. And years before I met my wife, I was part of an online community called Quantum Leap Al's Place, which I will provide the link. You can see it's not a very active fan site anymore, but it's still one of the biggest fan sites out there. At the time, during like the 2000s, it was a really big website. I mean, now everybody's on Facebook, and it's a very different world we're in now. Like, people don't use a lot of message boards anymore, but I was a big part of that community for a good number of years, and I still have friends from around the world who I've written things with. I've co-written stuff with them. I wrote stories for the website, and that continued the series. yeah, and I think it was like, and before I had ever joined that site, I had no idea that there were so many other fans of the show. This show really brought a lot of people together, and it brought me and my wife closer together. When she found out that I wrote stories, and this was like this was her favorite show of all time, and it was my favorite show, and we just kind of took it from there, and our relationship bloomed as a result of that. We got married on Leap Day 2016, because we loved the show so much. Um, and like I said, without the show, I don't know if I would have been the same man. I wouldn't have had the same relationship with her. I don't really know, but I have to thank that show for the life I have now, for the son I have. And Dean Stockwell was a huge part of that for me, um, which is why I felt I needed to share this story. Um, yeah, and I started this video not really sure exactly what I was going to say, because again, I feel like nothing I could really say will do the man justice. But he was such an important part of, I mean, he was one of my heroes, one of my real life heroes, him and Scott Bakula. And the show wouldn't have been the same without Dean Stockwell. So I just want to say, to Dean and to Bean's family, um, thank you. Um, Thank you for entertaining us. Thank you for inspiring us. Um, yeah, there's just not much else I can say. And me and my wife, we both feel the same way. Just thank you, Dean, for everything that you've tried to do, for your activism, for your talent. Thank you for sharing your talent with the world, and thank you for inspiring people like me, inspiring my wife, inspiring so many others, um, that enjoyed watching you perform. Um, and yeah, I think that's all I have to say. So yeah, so rest in peace, Dean. Thank you again, and until next time.